Welcome back to DIY Salvation. In an earlier video, we examined the Church of Scientology as an organization and not so much the actual religious technology. Today, we are comparing Dianetics to Trom. In Dianetics, there is a technique called returning. The practitioner, called an auditor, guides the pre-clear, his subject, through an incident of trauma which is called an engram. These engrams, or moments of pain or unconsciousness, are stored in what's called the reactive mind of the pre-clear. The reactive mind is the stimulus-response mind that operates below one's awareness, as opposed to the analytical mind, which is the conscious, rational thinking mind of the individual. The reactive mind thinks only in identities. The analytical mind thinks in terms of differences and similarities. I'll elaborate more on this as we go along. But for now, just know that the analytical mind is rational. The reactive mind is not. The reactive mind is an automaticity, or in other words, it works without the individual's conscious control, whereas the analytical mind is the one that the individual is aware of. When one suffers an incident of pain or unconsciousness, the reactive mind takes over, cuts out the analytical mind, and records an engram. Later on, this engram can have harmful effects on a person's health and sanity. When the circumstances of the engram are approximated in the person's present time environment, it can force the pain and suffering of its content on one without the person realizing what is happening to him. This is called re-stimulation. Re-stimulation can not only bring back the pain and suffering from the engram's content, it can also cause the person to dramatize or act out whatever else occurred in the incident. If words were spoken around him while he was in pain or unconscious, these words can act upon him, much the same way hypnotic commands would had the person simply been hypnotized. Also, he can act like the person who overwhelmed him in a situation. This last is, in Dianetics, referred to as taking on the winning valence, a valence being the identity of that person. Remember how I said that the reactive mind thinks in terms of identities? That's one way. The other way is that the reactive mind identifies or equates everything that happens in an engram with the other. It interprets its content by making irrational calculations, like the pain equals the objects equals the person, or valence, and the words spoken in the incident. It's the auditor's job to help the pre-clear confront his engrams in his reactive mind. The procedure would go something like the auditor asking the pre-clear to close his eyes and return to a moment of pain. The pre-clear would find such a moment, and while re-experiencing it, would describe such moment to the auditor. The auditor would ask the pre-clear questions about what's happening, and also give him commands to return to the beginning, go to the next moment, and so on and so forth. The auditor makes the pre-clear confront the engram, the idea being that the pre-clear, acting alone, would not be able to confront such himself, because the reactive mind, when addressed, will cut out the analytical mind and overwhelm the pre-clear. You could say, for the sake of simplicity, that the auditor is actually standing in for the pre-clear's analytical mind while he is undergoing Dianetics auditing. Dianetics is a powerful tool for getting relief from one's past trauma. It's worth finding out about, and we do have a video on this channel which helps understand how it works a bit better. And if you truly want to understand it in full, I recommend reading Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health by L. Ron Hubbard. Now, the actual problem with Dianetics has nothing to do with the validity of the theory or the effectiveness of the technique used to clear one's mind. It's more of a practical concern, actually. In the early days of Dianetics, it was found that some pre-clears were easier to run on Dianetics than others, and some auditors were more skilled than others. And if you got a difficult pre-clear with an auditor that was not very skilled, you are heading for disaster. Just the fact that you need 2 people alone brings about an issue, never mind being able to match up the skilled practitioners with the tougher cases and the less skilled with the easier cases. L. Ron Hubbard realized that auditors would need to be trained and that organizations would need to be built so that professional services could be administered so he could achieve his goal of a cleared planet, or in other words, a world without insanity, criminality, and war. Hubbard would have conversations with a friend of his, Dennis Stevens, about how it was not likely billions of pre-clears would be paying billions of auditors for such services, and that if mankind were to become truly free of the ill effects of the reactive mind once and for all, there would have to be a way that one could handle the reactive mind solo. After Dennis retired from the church in the late 1970s, he developed such a technique. Thrilled that the problem had finally been solved, he tried to get his research notes to L. Ron Hubbard, but to no avail, as at this time Hubbard was only reachable by a few. Dennis still wanted people to know about this discovery, so he compiled his notes and had them typed up by a friend, so that his method, the resolution of the mind, also known as Trom, could be studied as a standalone subject. Later on in the 90s, Dennis Stevens recorded lectures on the subject of Trom as cassette tape correspondence to those who were currently practicing Trom and wanted to know more about it. After Dennis's demise in the mid-90s, the subject of Trom survived and continued by way of independent Scientologists posting copies of his book and publishing his lectures on their websites and blogs. But as valuable as Dennis's technology was, it was still known to only a few, understood by even fewer, and actually practiced by even fewer than that. The main reason being the subject was difficult studying, not only because of its content, but also because such content was not presented in any way the layman could understand it easily. Today, here at DIY Salvation, we have gone through painstaking efforts to make sure that Trom can be understood by the masses, and we've accomplished such by proofreading, revising, annotating, and illustrating the original manual written by Dennis Stevens, and supporting it with dozens of hours of video content on YouTube explaining all the fundamental concepts. The advanced lectures are currently hosted on the YouTube channel Mind Resolution as well, for anyone wishing to do a deeper study of the subject. Now, while all this business of handling the reactive mind working solo sounds all fine and dandy, most anyone who's been thoroughly enough indoctrinated in the subject of Dianetics by the Church of Scientology will absolutely insist it cannot be done. But I'm going to explain the general idea of how Trom works and let you decide for yourself. The reactive mind is an automaticity. According to L. Ron Hubbard's own words, if you can get the pre-clear to do consciously what he's been doing on an automaticity, that automaticity will go away. There are many techniques in Scientology where this principle was applied to great success, but it was mostly applied to specific issues and problems the pre-clear was having, never to the whole of the reactive mind itself. Dennis simplified the concept of the reactive mind down to being an automatic invasion of the past on the present. So why not have the individual purposefully bring the past into his present, like the reactive mind does, so he can rid himself of that automaticity? Whereas a Dianetics auditor uses the technique of returning the pre-clear to times of his past, a Trom practitioner brings the past into his present. This technique is called Timebreaking. It breaks the illusion of time. Now, the person who practices Trom doesn't just read the book and immediately bring forth his past to invade the present. No, he prepares his mind and makes sure he can maintain his contact with the present with an exercise he learns at level 1. Then, at level 2, he brings only subjects and people from the past into the present, and compares such to objects and people in the present as a way to train himself how to do time-breaking, and also to give him some relief on his case. When he views the past object and compares it to the present object, he does so by noticing differences and similarities. While doing this, content from his reactive mind will surface in the form of odd sensations, negative emotions, and sometimes even some pain. When this happens, he trusts the technique and continues doing it until all such sensations have vanished, and he can comfortably view the object from the past next to an object from the present and note the differences and similarities between the two. There is solid theory behind this technique. Once again, I will mention how the reactive mind thinks in terms of identities, and the analytical mind thinks in terms of differences and similarities. The reactive mind identifies the present as the past and will equate the two. This causes all sorts of problems with the way one thinks and behaves. So in making the past appear in the present, you are mimicking what the reactive mind does. You are re-stimulating your case, but you're doing this on purpose, and that's the first step to destroying the automaticity of the reactive mind. The next step is, once the past object is in the present, you note the differences and similarities between the two. This is an analytical function, and you are using the analytical mind to do this process. And the more you do this, the more you lessen the importance of such past object. You begin down a road of lessening the importance of the past, so you can think and live more in the present. In Dianetics terminology, your environment is less re-stimulative to you. Once one has successfully finished working with objects, he moves on to the same process using people instead. This reduces the impact of the valences on his case. He will be much less likely to act like the people who've overwhelmed him in life, and will become more and more himself. You've heard many times the value of being yourself, and this technique helps greatly in accomplishing that. On level 3, the trauma now takes full incidents from his past and experiences them at the same time as the present. By now, his ability to evaluate the past versus the present has become automatic to him, a skill he has learned that is now part of his analytical thought processes. He maintains awareness of the past event in the present time environment and confronts the events bit at a time by becoming more and more aware of the physical sensations like sight and sound, then other things like his emotions and the emotions of others, thoughts and decisions that were made, and so on and so forth. On level 3, one confronts his known past. He does not necessarily jump right into looking for pain and unconsciousness in his case. While engaged in time-breaking, pain and unconsciousness may surface and subside, even if such don't directly relate to whatever incident he's running. His main purpose is to break down the automaticity of the reactive mind, not to run engrams. Levels 4 and 5 of Trom address the conflicting purposes in one's mind, and I will talk about how this is done and how such techniques compare to Scientology theory and practice in other videos. But for now, just know that returning to one's past, eyes closed, with the assistance of an auditor, versus bringing the past into the present, eyes open, working by oneself, is the most fundamental difference between how Dianetics and Trom work, and that Trom agrees with basic Dianetics and Scientology principles, yet implements them in such a way that Hubbard had not conceived of, yet Dennis did. That's all for now, and thank you for your time. To continue learning more about the resolution of the mind, also known as Trom, take a moment to download the free ebook from this video's description. Don't forget to subscribe so as not to miss any further videos. This has been a presentation of DIY Salvation. Don't just use your mind, resolve it.